Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, once said that every story you tell is a story about you. When it came to writing the quarterly essay, I suppose I wanted to ask myself this: what made me? If I'm an Indigenous person in Australia, how do I identify myself when clearly no longer can I call myself a disadvantaged person? I occupy a privileged place in Australia. I'm someone who has worked all around the world, whose children have enjoyed the best of education. By any standard, I live a fortunate life. If you looked at my life and contrasted that with other Indigenous people, how do we find an identity in common? Well, of course, like people all over the world, we are not people in common. We have been shaped by history different. We have found ourselves differently. We express ourselves differently. To trace this, I went back and looked at my own family, back to the first point of contact, looking at the movement of people after the initial dispossession and dispersal. I looked at people in my family who'd been rounded up and taken to reserves and missions to be Christianized and civilized, as they said. I looked at how they responded to that, how they survived, and the resilience that they showed to make a different life, a better life for their families. This I call the Great Aboriginal Economic Migration. These are the people who emerged from the reserves and settlements, who were looking for another way into Australia. And the way they were going to do that was through economic empowerment. Right from the earliest days of the Australian colony, it was seen that the future for Indigenous people, if they were to have one, was through the economy. It was predicted for a long time that Aboriginal people would simply die out, but we didn't die out. At that point, how do we actually find a place in Australia? If I look at my grandfather, he was someone who served in World War II, despite not having his full citizenship acknowledged in Australia. He was someone who worked as a fruit picker, who worked on local councils, who walked his family 300 kilometres off an Aboriginal mission to go to the Murrumbidgee irrigation area where there was plentiful work. He was someone who kept by his bed a copy of the Bible and the works of William Shakespeare. If I look at my father's life was one of an itinerant labourer. I spent my early years on the road with him, searching for survival, searching for a way into Australia. In later life, he has become a doctor at university. He teaches Aboriginal languages, and he has preserved the Wiradjuri language in the first dictionary ever recorded to write that language down. These are the people who have created opportunity for me. As a journalist, I've spent 17 years living outside of Australia. I've stood in the Oval Office of the White House, the Great Hall of the People in China. I've covered the big stories of our time, from war to natural disaster to political upheaval and economic collapse. And now back in Australia, I wanted to apply that lens to us. Where do we fit into Australia? Where do we fit into the big scope of history? How do we identify ourselves in the 21st century? This is looking beyond identity politics. This is looking beyond our history. This is not being a victim or trapped in history, but ask, where is our place? And how can we identify ourselves out of the deficit model? The model that sees us as failed people, the model that focuses on disadvantage, and actually look at a story of power and success. It is a story of migration, it is a story of resilience, it's a story of courage and strength, and it is the story that made me.